It was 17 minutes past midnight when Malaysia Airlines Flight 370 pushed back from Gate C1 at Kuala Lumpur International Airport. The date was March 8, 2014, a Saturday. The Boeing 777, one of the most sophisticated and safest aircraft ever built, carried 239 souls bound for Beijing. Most passengers had already settled into their seats, preparing for the 6-hour overnight journey that would deliver them to the Chinese capital just as dawn broke over the city. In the cockpit sat Captain Zahari Ahmad Shah, a 53-year-old veteran who had spent more than 3 decades with Malaysia Airlines. He had accumulated over 18,000 hours in the air, more than 15 years of which were spent commanding the Boeing 777. Beside him was First Officer Farik Abdul Hamid, 27 years old, engaged to be married, and on one of his first flights as a fully qualified co-pilot on this aircraft type. It was a routine pairing, an experienced captain mentoring a promising young officer on a route both men had flown many times before. The passenger manifest read like a cross-section of humanity drawn together by the ordinary rhythms of modern life. Among them were 24 Chinese artists returning home after exhibiting their calligraphy in Kuala Lumpur. There was a Malaysian couple, Norli Akmar Hamid and Muhammad Razahan Zamani, finally taking their long-delayed honeymoon after Norli had suffered a miscarriage. Paul Weeks, a 39-year-old mechanical engineer from New Zealand, was heading to Mongolia to begin a new job in the mining industry. Before leaving home, he had removed his wedding ring and watch, handing them to his wife Danica, with instructions that if something should happen to him, the ring should go to their first son, who married the watch to the second. There was Philip Wood, a 50-year-old IBM executive from Texas, one of only 3 Americans aboard. He had planned this trip to Beijing as a final visit before relocating to Kuala Lumpur. Firman Sirigar, a young Indonesian engineer, was traveling to China to start a new position with an oil company. His mother had helped him pack warm clothes for Beijing's freezing winter just hours before his departure. She had traveled from Medan specifically to spend those final hours with her youngest son. In the cabin, Chief Steward Patrick Gomes led the Malaysian crew. He had worked for the airline for 35 years, longer than some of his colleagues had been alive. 5 children under the age of 5 were among the passengers that night. Families traveling together, business executives, students, tourists, citizens from more than a dozen nations. 153 were from China, 50 were Malaysian. The rest came from Indonesia, Australia, India, France, the United States, Canada, New Zealand, Ukraine, Russia, Taiwan, Hong Kong, and the Netherlands. The aircraft itself, registered as 9 Mike Romeo Oscar, had rolled off Boeing's assembly line in 2002. It had accumulated more than 53,000 flight hours and 7,500 cycles without major incident. A minor collision while taxiing in Shanghai had damaged a wingtip 2 years earlier, but the aircraft had been repaired and returned to service. Its last maintenance check had been completed just 2 weeks before this flight. Everything was in order. At 41 minutes past midnight, the 777 lifted off runway 32 right and climbed into the warm, tropical darkness. The weather was clear. Visibility was good. First Officer Farik made the radio calls while Captain Zahari handled the controls. 20 minutes after takeoff, at 1 minute past 1 in the morning, local time, the aircraft reached its cruising altitude of 35,000 feet. Farik reported this to Kuala Lumpur Area Control. Everything was proceeding exactly as it should. At 7 minutes past 1, the Aircraft Communications Addressing and Reporting System, known as ACRS, transmitted a routine status message via satellite. The system was designed to automatically relay technical data about the aircraft's health and performance to the airline's operations center. This transmission indicated that all systems were functioning normally. The engines were running smoothly. The fuel load was as expected. There was no indication whatsoever that anything was wrong. 12 minutes later, at 19 minutes past 1 in the morning, Kuala Lumpur Air Traffic Control instructed Flight 370 to contact Ho Chi Minh radar as the aircraft approached the boundary of Vietnamese airspace over the South China Sea. Captain Zahari acknowledged the instruction with words that would become the most analyzed phrase in aviation history. "Good night, Malaysian 370. It was a perfectly ordinary sign-off. Pilots use such phrases hundreds of times every day around the world as they hand off between air traffic control centers. There was nothing in Zahari's voice to suggest distress, confusion, or anything other than the routine business of commercial aviation. Ho Chi Minh controllers expected the aircraft to check in within minutes. It never did. At 21 minutes past 1, just 2 minutes after that final radio transmission, the aircraft's transponder stopped broadcasting. The transponder is a device that responds to radar interrogation by transmitting a 4-digit code along with the aircraft's altitude, allowing controllers to identify specific flights on their screens. When it went silent, Flight 370's symbol vanished from civilian radar displays across the region. But the aircraft had not crashed. It had not exploded. It had not fallen from the sky. It had simply gone dark. And then, impossibly, it turned around. Malaysian military radar, operating independently of civilian air traffic control, continued to track an unidentified aircraft as it reversed course and flew back across the Malay Peninsula. The radar return showed the aircraft crossing the coastline near the resort island of Penang, then continuing northwest over the Andaman Sea toward the northern tip of the Indonesian island of Sumatra. At 2:22 in the morning, local time, the military radar recorded its final contact. The aircraft was heading out over the vast emptiness of the Indian Ocean. No one was looking for it there. For the next several hours, confusion reigned on the ground. Vietnamese controllers waited for the aircraft to appear on their screens. When it did not, they contacted Kuala Lumpur. The Malaysians said the aircraft was in Vietnamese airspace. The Vietnamese said it had never arrived. Phone calls went back and forth. Procedures that should have taken 5 minutes stretched to 12, then longer. It was not until 5:30 in the morning, more than 4 hours after the last radio contact, that Malaysia activated its search and rescue coordination center. By then, Malaysia Airlines had already issued a media statement announcing that communication with the flight had been lost. What no one realized at that moment was that Flight 370 was almost certainly still in the air, flying silently through the darkness somewhere over the Indian Ocean. The Boeing 777 is equipped with a satellite communication system that periodically exchanges data with ground stations, even when all other systems have been disabled. These automated exchanges, known as handshakes, occur roughly once per hour. The aircraft's satellite data unit had gone silent shortly after the transponder at 7 minutes past 1, but it came back online at 25 minutes past 6 in the morning, initiating a new connection with a communication satellite positioned over the Indian Ocean. Over the next 6 hours, 6 more of these handshakes were recorded. Each one provided investigators with a tiny piece of information. By analyzing the time it took for signals to travel between the aircraft and the satellite engineers at the British telecommunications company, Inmarsat could calculate how far the aircraft was from the satellite at each moment. By examining subtle variations in the signal frequency caused by the Doppler effect, they could determine whether the aircraft was moving toward or away from the satellite. The data told an astonishing story. Flight 370 had not crashed in the South China Sea. It had not landed at some remote airstrip. It had flown on for nearly 7 hours after vanishing from radar, traveling thousands of miles to the south, deep into one of the most remote and inhospitable regions on Earth. The final handshake occurred at 19 minutes past 8 in the morning, local time, more than 7 hours after takeoff. The data suggested the aircraft was descending rapidly, consistent with an uncontrolled dive toward the ocean surface. Somewhere along an arc stretching across the southern Indian Ocean, roughly 1,000 miles southwest of the Australian city of Perth, Flight 370 had run out of fuel and plunged into the sea. 239 people vanished without a trace. No distress call, no emergency beacon, no debris field visible to the aircraft and ships that rushed to search the area. Just silence and an ocean so deep and vast that it might as well have been another planet. The disappearance of Malaysia Airlines Flight 370 would become the greatest mystery in the history of aviation. It would trigger the most expensive search operation ever conducted. It would spawn countless theories, investigations, and heartbreak. And more than a decade later, the fundamental questions remain unanswered. What happened aboard that aircraft in the minutes after Captain Zahari said goodnight? Who disabled the tracking systems? Who turned the plane around? And why did a routine overnight flight to Beijing end in the cold, dark waters at the bottom of the world? The families of the 239 people aboard that flight have spent years searching for answers. Some have never stopped believing their loved ones might somehow still be alive. Others have accepted the terrible truth while demanding that the world not forget what was lost that night. All of them deserve to know what happened. This is their story. This is the story of Flight 370. The world learned that something was wrong on the morning of March 8, 2014, when Malaysia Airlines released a brief statement acknowledging that contact had been lost with Flight 370 in Beijing, where the aircraft was supposed to have landed at 6:30 in the morning. Hundreds of relatives had gathered at the airport, waiting for loved ones who would never arrive. The initial search focused on the South China Sea along the aircraft's planned flight path between Malaysia and Vietnam. Dozens of ships and aircraft from multiple nations converged on the area, scanning the waters for any sign of wreckage. They found nothing. Oil slicks that appeared promising turned out to be unrelated. Floating objects that sparked hope proved to be ordinary marine debris. Meanwhile, Malaysian authorities were grappling with a troubling discovery. Military radar records showed that an unidentified aircraft had crossed back over the Malay Peninsula in the early morning hours, flying west instead of northeast toward Beijing. At first, officials were reluctant to acknowledge this information publicly. The implications were deeply unsettling. If the radar returns were accurate, someone had deliberately turned the aircraft around and flown it in the opposite direction of its intended destination. On March 15th, 1 week after the disappearance, Malaysian Prime Minister Najib Razak addressed the world. The aircraft's communication systems, he announced, had been deliberately disabled. The last transmission from the transponder and the ACRS system occurred within minutes of each other at a time when the aircraft was transitioning from Malaysian to Vietnamese airspace. Someone with knowledge of the aircraft's systems had systematically shut them down. The Prime Minister revealed another critical piece of information. Based on satellite data analysis provided by Inmarsat investigators, had concluded that the aircraft had continued flying for approximately 7 hours after disappearing from radar. The data placed it somewhere along one of two possible arcs. One stretched north through Central Asia, the other curved south over the Indian Ocean. Attention quickly focused on the southern arc. Investigators reasoned that an aircraft flying north would have been detected by military radar systems in multiple countries. The southern route, by contrast, would have taken the plane over open ocean far from any radar coverage into one of the most remote regions on the planet. On March 24th, Prime Minister Najib made another announcement, this one far more difficult. Based on the satellite analysis, the Malaysian government had concluded that Flight 370 had ended in the southern Indian Ocean. There were no possible landing sites along the final portion of its flight path. The aircraft had almost certainly crashed into the sea. In Beijing, the news was delivered to waiting families via text message. The reaction was immediate and visceral. Relatives collapsed in grief. Others screamed in anger, demanding proof that their loved ones were truly gone. Chinese relatives stormed the Malaysian embassy, demanding answers that no one could provide. For many, the announcement felt premature, even cruel. How could authorities declare their families dead without recovering a single piece of wreckage, a single body, a single shred of physical evidence? The question would haunt the investigation for years to come. Australia, as the nation closest to the presumed crash site, assumed responsibility for leading the search effort. The task was staggering. The southern Indian Ocean is one of the most forbidding environments on Earth. The search area lay more than 1,000 miles from the nearest port. Seas in the region are notoriously rough, battered by powerful westerly winds known as the Roaring Forties. The ocean floor in this area had never been mapped in detail. No one knew what terrain the searchers would encounter in the depths below. The first phase of the search focused on detecting signals from the aircraft's underwater locator beacons, commonly known as pingers. These devices attached to the flight data recorder and cockpit voice recorder are designed to emit an acoustic pulse once per second for at least 30 days after a crash, helping searchers locate the wreckage. Time was running out. The batteries powering these beacons had a limited lifespan, and every day that passed reduced the chances of detecting a signal. In early April, an Australian vessel towing a specialized listening device detected several acoustic signals in a remote area of the Indian Ocean. Hope surged among investigators and families alike. The signals were consistent with the frequency used by aircraft pingers. Submarines and autonomous underwater vehicles were deployed to investigate. Searchers scanned the ocean floor in the area where the signals had been detected. They found nothing. No wreckage, no debris field, no black boxes. Analysis eventually concluded that the signals had likely come from some other source, perhaps equipment aboard the search vessels themselves. The beacons had probably stopped transmitting before searchers arrived in the area. The brief moment of hope faded into another dead end. Through the remainder of 2014 and into 2015, the underwater search continued. Ships equipped with sophisticated sonar systems methodically scanned the ocean floor, building the first detailed maps of terrain that no human had ever seen. They discovered underwater mountains rising thousands of feet from the abyssal plain. They found deep trenches and complex geological formations. They located shipwrecks from centuries past vessels lost to storms and time in this unforgiving corner of the world. But they did not find Flight 370. The search area was refined repeatedly as analysts re-examined the satellite data, looking for any clue that might narrow the possibilities. The mathematics involved were extraordinarily complex. The Inmarsat data provided information about the aircraft's distance from the satellite at each handshake, but not its direction. Each data point placed the aircraft somewhere along an arc thousands of miles long. Determining where along that arc the plane had actually been required sophisticated modeling of the aircraft's likely speed altitude and flight path. Different assumptions produced different results. The search area expanded and contracted as new analyses were completed. By the end of 2015, searchers had covered approximately 50,000 square kilometers of ocean floor without finding the aircraft. The following year, they expanded the effort to cover 120,000 square kilometers, an area roughly the size of England. The cost was staggering. By the time the official search was suspended in January 2017, the three governments funding the effort, Malaysia, Australia, and China, had spent more than $150 million. It was the most expensive search operation in aviation history, and it had failed. Investigators were left with a profound mystery. The satellite data strongly suggested that the aircraft had crashed somewhere in the southern Indian Ocean, but the wreckage was not where the analysis predicted it should be. Either the aircraft had come down in a location not yet searched, or something about the underlying assumptions was wrong. The suspension of the search was devastating for the families who had spent nearly 3 years hoping for answers. Many refused to accept that the effort was over. They organized their own searches, traveling to remote islands in the Indian Ocean to comb beaches for debris. They hired private investigators. They pressured governments to resume the hunt. They refused to let the world forget. Their persistence would eventually be rewarded, though not in the way they had hoped. On July 29, 2015, 16 months after the aircraft disappeared, a maintenance worker named Johnny Beeg was cleaning a beach on the French island of Réunion, located in the western Indian Ocean east of Madagascar. Among the rocks and seaweed, he noticed something unusual: a large curved piece of metal, roughly 6 feet long, covered in barnacles. It looked like part of an airplane. Beeg reported his discovery to local authorities. Photographs were sent to aviation experts around the world. Within hours, analysts had identified the object as a flaperon, a movable panel on the trailing edge of an aircraft wing used to control lift during takeoff and landing. The distinctive shape and construction were consistent with a Boeing 777. The flaperon was transported to France for forensic examination. Investigators found a serial number stamped on an interior surface. They traced it through Boeing's records, through the component manufacturer in Spain, through the supply chain that had delivered the part to the Everett factory, where 9 Mike Romeo Oscar had been assembled more than a decade earlier. On September 3, 2015, French authorities made the announcement the world had been waiting for. The flaperon found on Réunion was positively confirmed as originating from Malaysia Airlines Flight 370. For the first time since the aircraft vanished, there was physical proof that it had crashed. The discovery validated what investigators had believed all along. The aircraft had indeed gone down in the southern Indian Ocean. Ocean currents had carried the debris westward across thousands of miles of open water, depositing it on the shores of Réunion nearly a year and a half later. More debris would follow. In the months and years after the Réunion discovery, more than 40 pieces of suspected wreckage washed up on beaches across the western Indian Ocean. A piece of the horizontal stabilizer was found in Mozambique. Parts of the wing flaps turned up in Tanzania and Mauritius. Interior cabin panels appeared in Madagascar. Personal effects, including a fragment of a suitcase, were recovered. 3 pieces were definitively confirmed as coming from Flight 370 through serial numbers or unique manufacturing marks. 18 others were assessed as very likely or almost certainly from the aircraft based on their construction materials and the distinctive paint scheme used by Malaysia Airlines. The debris told a grim story. The presence of interior cabin components suggested that the aircraft had broken apart either on impact with the water or shortly thereafter. The flaperon showed no signs of fire or explosion damage, but its condition was consistent with high-speed impact. Whatever had happened in those final moments, the aircraft had not made a controlled landing on the water's surface. Australian scientists used the debris to refine their estimates of where the aircraft had gone down. By studying ocean currents and wind patterns, they could work backward from where the debris had been found to estimate where it had originated. The analysis pointed to an area at the southern end of the search zone, around 35 degrees south latitude, an area that had not been fully searched due to challenging underwater terrain. In 2018, the private marine exploration company Ocean Infinity launched a new search effort under a find no fee agreement with the Malaysian government. Using advanced autonomous underwater vehicles, they scanned more than 112,000 square kilometers of ocean floor in just a few months. They discovered shipwrecks that had been lost for over a century. They mapped underwater landscapes never before seen by human eyes. But once again, they did not find Flight 370. The search was suspended again. Years passed. Technology improved. New analyses of the satellite data suggested slightly different crash locations. Independent researchers proposed alternative theories, some supported by evidence, others veering into speculation. The mystery endured. Then in late 2024, the Malaysian government announced that it would authorize a new search. Ocean Infinity submitted a proposal to cover 15,000 square kilometers of ocean floor in an area refined by the latest drift analysis and satellite data interpretation. The company's technology had advanced significantly since their previous effort. Their new fleet of autonomous vehicles could operate more efficiently, cover more ground, and image the sea floor in greater detail than ever before. On December 30th, 2025, the search resumed. The vessel Armada 8605 departed from the Australian port of Fremantle heading into the Indian Ocean with a team of underwater robots capable of diving to depths of 6,000 meters. For the families who had spent nearly 12 years waiting, it represented another chance at closure, another hope that the truth might finally be found. As of this telling, that search continues. The ocean keeps its secrets well. But somewhere in the darkness below the wreckage of Flight 370 lies waiting to be discovered. Understanding what happened to Flight 370 requires understanding how modern aircraft communicate with the world around them. Commercial airliners are equipped with multiple systems designed to track their position, relay technical information, and maintain contact with air traffic controllers. On the night of March 8, 2014, nearly all of these systems went silent within minutes of each other. The transponder is perhaps the most critical tracking device aboard any aircraft. When air traffic control radar sends an interrogation signal, the transponder responds with a 4-digit code assigned to that particular flight, along with the aircraft's altitude. This allows controllers to identify individual aircraft on their screens, distinguishing one flight from dozens of others in the same airspace. At 21 minutes past 1 in the morning, the transponder aboard Flight 370 stopped responding. The aircraft's symbol vanished from civilian radar displays. The Aircraft Communications, Addressing, and Reporting System, known by its acronym ACARS, serves a different purpose. It automatically transmits data about the aircraft systems to the airline's operations center, allowing maintenance crews to monitor the plane's health in real time. ACARS can also send and receive text messages between the cockpit and ground personnel. The last ACARS transmission from Flight 370 occurred at 7 minutes past 1, just before the final radio contact. The system was scheduled to send another update approximately half an hour later. That transmission never came. Disabling these systems requires specific knowledge. The transponder can be switched off from a panel in the cockpit. ACARS is more complex. The system's data link function can be disabled, but the underlying equipment remains active unless power is cut from the electronics bay. Investigators believe that someone aboard the aircraft deliberately disabled these systems, suggesting either a pilot or someone with detailed technical knowledge of the Boeing 777. There was, however, one system that could not be completely silenced. The aircraft's satellite data unit, part of the communications package manufactured by Honeywell and operated through the Inmarsat network, continued to function even after other systems went dark. This equipment allows the aircraft to communicate via satellite when out of range of ground-based radio stations. Normally, it would transmit position reports and other data. But even when not actively sending information, the satellite data unit periodically exchanges signals with ground stations to maintain its network connection. These exchanges, known as handshakes, occur automatically at roughly hourly intervals. If the ground station has not heard from an aircraft for a period of time, it sends a query essentially asking if the aircraft is still there. The satellite data unit responds, confirming the connection. This simple electronic conversation proved to be the key to understanding where Flight 370 went after vanishing from radar. Engineers at Inmarsat, the British company that operates the satellite network, retrieved the records of these handshakes from their servers. They found that the satellite data unit aboard 9 Mike Romeo Oscar had gone silent shortly after the transponder, around the same time that the aircraft disappeared from radar. But at 25 minutes past 6 in the morning, more than 5 hours later, the unit came back online. It initiated a new connection with the satellite, a log-on request that suggested the system had lost power and then regained it. Over the next 2 hours, 6 more handshakes were recorded, the last at 19 minutes past 8 in the morning. Then silence. The satellite never heard from the aircraft again. Each handshake contained 2 pieces of information that would prove invaluable to investigators. The first was the burst timing offset, a measurement of how long it took signals to travel between the aircraft and the satellite. Since radio waves travel at the speed of light, this timing data could be used to calculate the distance between the aircraft and the satellite at the moment of each handshake. The aircraft had to be somewhere along a circle of that radius centered on the satellite's position over the Indian Ocean. The second piece of information was the burst frequency offset, a measurement of how the signal's frequency had shifted during transmission. This shift occurs due to the Doppler effect, the same phenomenon that causes a siren to sound higher in pitch as an ambulance approaches and lower as it drives away. By analyzing the frequency offset, engineers could determine whether the aircraft was moving toward or away from the satellite, and roughly how fast. Combining these 2 data points allowed Inmarsat to narrow the possibilities dramatically. The timing data placed the aircraft somewhere along an arc. The frequency data indicated which direction along that arc the aircraft was traveling. When the analysis was complete, it pointed overwhelmingly to the southern Indian Ocean. The seventh and final handshake, recorded at 19 minutes past 8, was particularly significant. Unlike the previous exchanges, this one was initiated by the aircraft rather than the ground station. The satellite data unit sent a log-on request indicating that it had just powered up after a period without electricity. Investigators interpreted this as evidence that the aircraft's main engines had run out of fuel, causing a temporary loss of electrical power before the auxiliary power unit kicked in to restore some systems. The frequency data from this final transmission suggested something else. The aircraft was descending rapidly at a rate consistent with an uncontrolled dive. The satellite data unit managed to begin a log-on sequence, but the connection was cut off after just 8 seconds. Whatever happened next happened quickly. Somewhere along the seventh arc, the curved line representing the aircraft's distance from the satellite, at that final moment Flight 370 met its end. The search area was defined by this arc stretching across the southern Indian Ocean, roughly between 32 and 38 degrees south latitude. The challenge was determining exactly where along that arc the aircraft had crossed a distance of hundreds of miles. Investigators developed sophisticated models of the aircraft's likely flight path, incorporating assumptions about its speed, altitude, and fuel consumption. They examined radar data from multiple countries, piecing together the aircraft's movements until it passed beyond the range of military surveillance. They analyzed the performance characteristics of the Boeing 777, calculating how far it could have traveled on its remaining fuel. The models converged on a probable crash location somewhere between 34 and 36 degrees south latitude, roughly 1,000 nautical miles southwest of Perth, Australia. This became the priority search area, a zone of approximately 60,000 square kilometers that investigators believed had the highest probability of containing the wreckage. But the ocean in this region is extraordinarily deep and complex. The seafloor lies between 3 and 6 kilometers below the surface, a crushing depth where sunlight never penetrates and water pressure is immense. The terrain is varied and treacherous with underwater mountains, deep trenches, and vast plains of sediment. Searching this environment requires specialized technology, and even the most advanced equipment has limitations. The underwater search employed autonomous vehicles equipped with side-scan sonar, capable of creating detailed acoustic images of the seafloor. These robots operated independently, diving to depth and methodically sweeping back and forth across the search area, recording everything they encountered. When they surfaced, their data was analyzed by specialists looking for anything that might indicate aircraft wreckage. Over 3 years, searchers mapped more than 120,000 square kilometers of previously uncharted ocean floor. They discovered geological features never before documented. They found the wrecks of 19th century sailing ships' wooden hulls preserved in the cold, dark waters. They identified objects that initially appeared promising, but turned out to be natural formations or unrelated debris. The aircraft remained hidden. Some investigators began to question the assumptions underlying the search. Perhaps the aircraft had glided further than expected after running out of fuel. Perhaps someone had been at the controls during the final descent, extending the distance from the seventh arc. Perhaps the satellite data itself contained errors that had skewed the analysis. The debris that washed up on beaches across the Indian Ocean provided another avenue of investigation. By studying how the flaperon and other pieces had drifted over time, scientists could work backward to estimate their point of origin. This drift analysis pointed to an area slightly north of where the intensive search had focused, around 35 degrees south latitude. The latest search, launched in late 2025, is concentrating on this refined area. The technology has improved dramatically since the initial effort. Modern autonomous vehicles can cover more ground more quickly with higher resolution imaging systems and greater endurance. Machine learning algorithms can help identify potential targets in sonar data, reducing the burden on human analysts. Whether this search will finally succeed where others have failed remains to be seen. The ocean is vast, and the wreckage of a single aircraft, even one as large as a Boeing 777, represents an infinitesimally small target in that immensity. But the tools have never been better, and the determination of those seeking answers has never wavered. The satellite data analysis that guided investigators to the southern Indian Ocean represents one of the most remarkable feats of forensic engineering in aviation history. From the faintest electronic whispers, scientists reconstructed the final hours of a doomed aircraft. They cannot tell us why the plane flew south, or who was at the controls, or what happened in the cabin during those long, silent hours over the ocean, but they gave the world a place to look. And that place, against all odds, proved to be correct. The debris confirms it. Flight 370 ended its journey somewhere in the waters southwest of Australia, just as the Inmarsat analysis predicted. The wreckage is there, waiting in the darkness. And someday, perhaps soon, searchers will find it. In the years since Flight 370 vanished, investigators have examined every conceivable explanation for what went wrong. They have scrutinized the aircraft's maintenance records, the crew's backgrounds, the passenger manifest, and the cargo hold. They have analyzed radar data, satellite communications, and debris patterns. They have interviewed witnesses, reviewed security footage, and examined digital evidence. And yet the fundamental question remains unanswered. The official investigation conducted by Malaysian authorities with assistance from experts around the world released its final report in July 2018. The document ran to nearly 500 pages. It detailed the aircraft's systems, the crew's qualifications, the sequence of events as best they could be reconstructed, and the extensive search effort that followed. It acknowledged that the aircraft's flight controls had been deliberately manipulated to deviate from the planned route, but it could not determine who had done so or why. The answer can only be conclusive if the wreckage is found, the lead investigator told reporters at the time. It was a frustrating conclusion for the families, who had waited more than 4 years for answers, but it was also an honest one. Without the flight data recorder and cockpit voice recorder, without physical examination of the wreckage, investigators simply could not establish what had happened with certainty. The report did identify significant failures in the response to the aircraft's disappearance. Air traffic controllers in both Malaysia and Vietnam had not followed standard procedures when the aircraft failed to check in as expected. The delay in activating search and rescue operations may have cost precious time. The report issued safety recommendations aimed at preventing such lapses in the future. It also addressed the question that had dominated public speculation from the earliest days of the investigation. Was this an act of deliberate human intervention? The evidence strongly suggested that it was. The systematic disabling of communication systems, the precisely timed turn away from the planned route, the aircraft's subsequent journey deep into the southern Indian Ocean, all of these pointed to intentional action rather than mechanical failure or accident. But identifying who took that action proved impossible. The investigation examined everyone aboard the aircraft. It found no evidence of financial difficulties, psychological problems, or extremist affiliations among the passengers. 2 Iranian nationals traveling on stolen passports were quickly cleared as asylum seekers with no connection to terrorism. Background checks on the cabin crew revealed nothing suspicious. Attention inevitably focused on the 2 men in the cockpit. Captain Zahari Ahmad Shah was a veteran pilot with an unblemished career record. He had logged more than 18,000 hours in the air. He was a type rating instructor and examiner trusted to train and evaluate other pilots on the Boeing 777. Colleagues described him as professional, experienced, and passionate about aviation. He had built an elaborate flight simulator in his home, a hobby he shared with other enthusiasts around the world. The flight simulator attracted intense scrutiny. Investigators from the Malaysian police and the American Federal Bureau of Investigation examined the equipment and recovered data from its computer systems. They found that someone had used the simulator to fly routes over various parts of the world, including the Indian Ocean. Some reports suggested that a simulated flight path similar to the one taken by Flight 370 had been flown on the system weeks before the disappearance. Malaysian authorities examined this evidence and concluded that there was nothing sinister about it. Flight simulation enthusiasts routinely fly all manner of routes, including remote oceanic tracks. The presence of Indian Ocean flight paths on the simulator did not prove intent to crash an aircraft there. The official report stated that the Royal Malaysia Police Forensic Examination found no unusual activities other than game-related flight simulations. Others interpreted the same evidence differently. Some aviation analysts argued that the simulated route was too similar to the actual flight path to be coincidental. They pointed to reports of personal difficulties in the captain's life, including unverified claims of marital problems. They suggested that Zahari may have planned and executed a deliberate act. His family has consistently denied these allegations. His sister called him a scapegoat and insisted that police found nothing incriminating. His friends and colleagues expressed disbelief that the man they knew could have done such a thing. The official investigation found no significant changes in his lifestyle, interpersonal conflict, or family stresses in the period before the flight. First Officer Farik Abdul Hamid faced less scrutiny but was not immune from suspicion. He was young, relatively inexperienced on the aircraft type, and about to be married. Nothing in his background suggested any motive for destroying the aircraft. His family and fiancée described him as a dedicated young pilot with a promising career ahead. Malaysian police investigated both men thoroughly. They examined financial records, interviewed family members and associates, and reviewed their activities in the days leading up to the flight. They found no evidence that either pilot had expressed suicidal thoughts, radical beliefs, or any intention to harm the aircraft or its passengers. And yet someone disabled those systems. Someone turned that aircraft around. Someone flew it for 7 hours into one of the most remote places on Earth. The official report acknowledged this reality while declining to assign blame. The course deviation was carried out manually, it concluded, but whether by the pilots or a third party could not be determined without additional evidence. The finding left the question open, a gap that speculation has been eager to fill. Numerous alternative theories have been proposed over the years. Some suggest that the aircraft was hijacked by unknown individuals who somehow gained access to the cockpit. Others propose mechanical failures that incapacitated the crew while leaving the aircraft able to fly on autopilot. A few have ventured into more exotic territory, suggesting government conspiracies, military shootdowns, or elaborate cover-ups. None of these theories has been supported by credible evidence. The hijacking scenario struggles to explain how intruders could have entered the cockpit, disabled the communication systems, and reprogrammed the flight path without any distress call or sign of struggle. The mechanical failure theory cannot account for the deliberate nature of the system shutdowns and course changes. The conspiracy theories rely on assumptions that strain credulity and ignore the physical evidence of debris washing up across the Indian Ocean. The most likely explanation, according to most independent analysts, remains that someone in the cockpit deliberately diverted the aircraft. Who that was and what their motivation might have been may never be known unless the wreckage is recovered and the black boxes retrieved. Even then, the cockpit voice recorder captures only the final 2 hours of audio, and if the cockpit was silent during that time, it may reveal little. What the evidence does tell us is heartbreaking enough. 239 people boarded a routine overnight flight and never arrived at their destination. They included children and grandparents, newlyweds and business travelers, artists and engineers, people from more than a dozen countries whose lives intersected briefly in the departure lounge of Kuala Lumpur International Airport before ending together in the depths of the Indian Ocean. Their families have endured years of uncertainty, grief, and frustration. Many have become advocates pushing governments to continue the search, demanding transparency from investigators, and supporting one another through the long ordeal. They have traveled to Malaysia to confront officials. They have scoured beaches for debris. They have filed lawsuits and organized memorials and refused to let the world forget. In Beijing, where most of the passengers had been headed, relatives gathered annually on the anniversary of the disappearance to light candles and pray. Some have said they still hope to see their loved ones again, unable to accept a death without a body, without proof, without closure. Others have found ways to move forward while keeping the memory alive. How could I give up? One mother asked, speaking of her continued activism years after losing her son. If I don't stand up, how can I face them? The families deserve answers. The 239 people who died that night deserve to be found. The aviation industry, which has learned from countless tragedies to make flying safer, deserves to understand what went wrong so that it never happens again. Until the wreckage is located and the recorders recovered, Flight 370 will remain what it has been since March 8, 2014. The greatest mystery in the history of aviation, a wound that cannot fully heal, and a reminder that even in an age of constant connectivity and global surveillance, the Earth still holds places where a massive aircraft can vanish as completely as if it had never existed at all. The disappearance of Flight 370 changed aviation forever. In the years since that March night in 2014, the industry has confronted an uncomfortable truth. For all the technology aboard modern aircraft, for all the satellites circling overhead, and radar stations scanning the skies, it was still possible for a commercial airliner to vanish without a trace. The systems designed to track aircraft had gaps, and a determined individual could exploit them. The response has been comprehensive. The International Civil Aviation Organization, the United Nations agency responsible for aviation standards, developed new requirements for flight tracking and emergency location. These standards implemented under a framework called the Global Aeronautical Distress and Safety System mandate that aircraft report their position at least every 15 minutes during normal flight. When distress is detected, the reporting interval increases to once per minute. The technology to enable this tracking already existed. Satellite-based systems could monitor aircraft anywhere in the world over oceans, deserts, and polar regions where ground-based radar cannot reach. What was lacking before Flight 370 was the requirement to use it. The disaster changed that calculation. New regulations also addressed the underwater locator beacons attached to flight recorders. Before 2014, these devices were required to transmit for 30 days after a crash. Investigators searching for Flight 370 realized that this window might not be sufficient for accidents in remote locations. The standard has since been extended to 90 days, giving searchers more time to locate wreckage in challenging environments. Aircraft manufacturers and airlines have implemented additional safeguards. Some carriers now use systems that automatically transmit flight data in real time, creating a continuous record that exists independently of the recorders aboard the aircraft. If the plane is lost, investigators would have access to critical information even without recovering the black boxes. The Boeing 777 itself, despite being one of the safest aircraft ever built, received additional scrutiny. Engineers examined whether any design features could be exploited to disable tracking systems. Security procedures were reviewed to prevent unauthorized access to the flight deck. The aircraft's outstanding safety record remained intact, but the industry took nothing for granted. Perhaps the most significant change has been psychological. Before Flight 370, the idea that a modern airliner could simply disappear seemed almost impossible. The world had grown accustomed to knowing where aircraft were at all times, to receiving minute-by-minute updates on flight progress through smartphone apps and airport displays. The loss of 370 shattered that assumption. It also demonstrated the limits of search and rescue capabilities. The southern Indian Ocean proved to be one of the most difficult environments on Earth to search. The depth, the weather, the distance from any base of operations all combined to make the effort extraordinarily challenging. Even with resources from multiple nations and technology at the cutting edge of what was possible, the aircraft eluded discovery. The lessons learned have improved the chances that future accidents will be located more quickly. Better coordination between military and civilian authorities can accelerate the response when an aircraft goes missing. Improved drift modeling can help predict where debris will travel. Advances in autonomous underwater vehicles have made deep-sea search operations more efficient and effective. But some aspects of the Flight 370 mystery may never be resolved through technology or investigation. The human element, the question of why someone would take such an action, lies beyond the reach of engineering solutions. Understanding that would require access to the minds of those involved, and they are gone. What remains is memory. The passengers aboard Flight 370 came from all walks of life. They were united only by circumstance, by the coincidence of booking seats on the same aircraft on the same night. In the years since their deaths, their families have worked to ensure that they are remembered not as victims of a mystery, but as individuals whose lives had meaning and purpose. The Chinese artists were returning from an exhibition that had showcased their mastery of traditional calligraphy. They had spent their careers preserving and advancing an art form thousands of years old. Their work survives them displayed in galleries and collections across Asia. Paul Weeks, the New Zealand engineer heading to his new job in Mongolia, left behind a wife and 2 young sons. His widow has spoken publicly about her husband's character, his dedication to his family, and the premonition that led him to remove his wedding ring before the flight. She has become an advocate for the family, speaking out when the search was suspended and celebrating when it resumed. Patrick Gomes, the chief steward with 35 years of service, was remembered by Malaysia Airlines as a consummate professional who exemplified the best of the carrier's traditions. His widow has been at the forefront of efforts to continue the search, traveling to Madagascar to look for debris and meeting with government officials to press for answers. The Indonesian mother, who helped her son pack warm clothes for Beijing, still keeps the same phone number she had in 2014. She explained to journalists that she wants him to be able to reach her if he ever tries to call. The hope, however irrational it might seem, sustains her. In Malaysia, annual memorial services bring together families, airline employees, and government officials to honor those who were lost. Similar gatherings take place in Beijing, where most of the passengers had been expected to land on that March morning. The 10th anniversary in 2024 drew renewed international attention to the case, prompting Malaysia to authorize the latest search effort. The families have found strength in one another. They have formed support groups and advocacy organizations. They have shared their grief and their determination across borders and languages. Many have said that the bond formed through this tragedy has become one of the few positive outcomes of an otherwise devastating experience. Their advocacy has produced results. Without family pressure, the search might have ended sooner and with less effort. Without their persistent demands for information, investigators might have been less forthcoming about their findings. Without their willingness to speak to media and legislators, the public might have forgotten about Flight 370 years ago. As the current search continues in the southern Indian Ocean, the families watch and wait once more. They have experienced this cycle of hope and disappointment before. The acoustic detections in 2014 that turned out to be false alarms. The debris discoveries that confirmed the crash, but not its location. The previous Ocean Infinity search that scanned more than 100,000 square kilometers without success. But hope endures. The technology is better now. The search area has been refined based on years of additional analysis. The commitment remains strong. If the wreckage can be found, this may be the best chance yet to find it. And if it is found, what then? The flight recorders, if they can be recovered after more than a decade on the ocean floor, may or may not contain useful data. The cockpit voice recorder captures only the final 2 hours of audio, and if the cockpit was silent, it will tell us little. The flight data recorder tracks hundreds of parameters about the aircraft's operation, but it cannot explain human motivation. Even with the recorders in hand, the full truth may remain elusive. We may learn exactly when and how the aircraft entered the water. We may be able to trace its final flight path with precision. We may discover whether someone was at the controls until the very end, or whether the aircraft spiraled down unmanned after fuel exhaustion, but we may never know why. For the families, finding the wreckage would bring a measure of closure that has been denied them for too long. It would confirm what the debris has already told us, that their loved ones perished in the Indian Ocean. It would provide a site for remembrance, a place where the lost can be honored, even if their remains can never be recovered from such depths. For the aviation industry, finding the wreckage would complete the investigation. It would answer technical questions about the aircraft's condition and flight path. It would provide data that could inform future safety improvements. It would close a chapter that has remained troublingly open. For the world, finding the wreckage would solve a mystery that has captivated and haunted us for more than a decade. It would demonstrate that even the most baffling disappearances can eventually be explained. It would honor the principle that every life matters, that no one should vanish without the world knowing what happened to them. The search continues. Somewhere in the cold darkness of the southern Indian Ocean, roughly 1,000 miles from the nearest land, the wreckage of Malaysia Airlines Flight 370 rests on the seafloor. The Boeing 777 that carried 239 people toward Beijing on a routine overnight flight now lies scattered across an unknown patch of abyssal plain, its secrets preserved in the eternal night of the deep. One day, perhaps soon, searchers will find it. They will document what remains. They will recover what can be recovered. And they will bring closure to families who have waited more than 11 years for answers. Until that day, we remember. We remember Captain Zahari Ahmad Shah and First Officer Farik Abdul Hamid. We remember Chief Steward Patrick Gomes and the 11 other crew members who served the passengers that night. We remember the artists and engineers, the business people and tourists, the couples and families and individuals whose journeys ended together in the waters southwest of Australia. We remember the 5 children under the age of 5. We remember the elderly grandparents. We remember the newlyweds and the young professionals starting new chapters in their lives. We remember every one of the 239 souls aboard Flight 370. Their story is not finished. The mystery is not solved, but their memory endures. And as long as people remember, as long as families keep searching and investigators keep working and the world keeps asking questions, Flight 370 will never be truly lost. The aircraft may have disappeared, but the people aboard it will not be forgotten.